I do want to thank Jeff and the Franciscan Spirit Club for having me here today. It's a pretty big honor to be the first person, and it's also terrifying. I don't want to be the person who breaks Agape Latte, especially after it's been so successful everywhere else. And I really hate public speaking. Right? So for me, this is like the most terrifying thing you could ask me to do. And I want to talk about that story tonight and why that's the case. Because I was not always the really cool, popular person you see right in front of you today. Right? So, I grew up as one of 11 kids. I was the 8th of 11. And my parents both were phys ed majors in college, right? So they were going to be gym teachers. Mom actually dropped out of school, didn't complete school, because she went to work while my dad went into the Army after college so that they could get married. I have 5 older brothers, in that 11 being the 8th. 5 of them are older brothers. And because Mom and Dad were phys ed teachers, they were all athletes, and really good athletes. My oldest brother, the one I refer to as my perfect brother, he was a 3-sport athlete in high school. He was a school valedictorian. He went to West Point, so ended up getting into West Point. While he was at West Point, he started playing this sport, team handball, that he had never played before, made the U.S. national team, and was named to the U.S. Olympic team for 1980, I think. That was the year that the U.S. decided to boycott the Moscow Olympics. So he could have been an Olympic athlete, but we chose to boycott. So follow that going through school, right? It was always kind of a tough act to follow. But he was great to us. My older brother, when we were little kids, right, he would take us to the beach, he'd take us out for ice cream all the time, right? He would drive us to all these places, and we didn't understand as little kids, right, that he was doing all this stuff for us. We just expected that's what our older brother should do for us. So it was interesting growing up with him, and he always kind of took care of us. And I was mostly a normal little kid, right? I'm proud to say that in the 1st grade, I was the king of the jungle gym at recess time, right? I was really good at that. I was also the first kid in the 1st grade who could climb to the top of the rope in gym class, right? So I was it. Right? So I really had high standards. I even had the lead in our 1st grade play as the little white rabbit who wanted red wings. And it had nothing to do with talent. I just raised my hand first when the teacher asked for a volunteer. So I was kind of a normal little kid. Mom was kind of our anchor. Mom made sure that every week the whole family went to church. So imagine us, 13 of us, right, parading into church. We filled up the whole pew. And it was a weekly thing. There was not an alternative. You went to church. And I can remember growing up, the priest at church was ironically Father Francis, right? So he was named for St. Francis. And Father Francis was this little Italian guy. He's probably not any taller than this, bald. And I grew up thinking that's what God must look like, right? Because that's what the priest looked like. And Father Francis was one of those people who, when he got up to preach, he would yell, right? He would be really loud, and he'd get really fired up and going. And I remember one day sitting in my spot in the pew, and we had assigned spots in the pew, right? Mom knew who could sit next to whom without getting in a fight in church. So I was in my assigned spot, and he was really getting loud that day. And he started telling us that we needed to make our rosaries come alive, right? I remember that, and screaming, make those rosaries come alive. And I was sitting there now in a panic as a little kid thinking, okay, next week my 5 older brothers will all have rosaries that are alive, and mine will still just be lying there, right? I had no idea how that was going to work. And for my first communion, my grandmother gave me this gold St. Francis medal. You know, the Francis stuff started seeming a little weak. I didn't even know who St. Francis was. I liked it at the time because it had bunnies on it, right? So I just thought it was kind of cool. So that was me growing up, right? We kind of a normal childhood. I had 2 parents, a big family. We had our own teams for all the neighborhood sports. Now, imagine you're going out to play and all of your brothers are there, right? These 5 older brothers. And it was my family against the neighborhood. And my brothers were pretty tough critics, right? So if you messed up, they let you know. And I was the youngest of the 5 of us going out there, so they always had some kind of critique, right? I was a pretty little kid. In fact, I don't think I broke 100 pounds till I was maybe a sophomore in high school. So I was really little. Now I'm way past 100, right? But back then, not so much. So really, they just felt that most of the time when it came to athletics, I got in the way. Okay? So I was really just kind of that, all right, it's the little brother tagging along. But I wanted to go because all my brothers were going. So we got involved in lots of things. And as you can imagine, in a family of 11, we didn't always get lots of new stuff. Right? So imagine you are one of 11 kids. Mom stayed home with us, so it was all based on Dad's teaching salary. And we had 11 of us to take care of. So as a little kid, you don't recognize this stuff. It's only now, looking back at it, that I can start to see Mom must have been the greatest budgeter in the world, right? We did not get big family vacations like some of you may have gone to Disney World and those things. We never got to do that, right? We didn't go out to eat much. In fact, the only time we really got to go out was we'd go to McDonald's or the Red Barn here in Hamburg, when the Red Barn was still here, when they would have 10-cent hamburgers, right? So they'd load us all into the Volkswagen bus. Remember those things from this? Well, you won't remember them, but if you've ever seen pictures of them, right? Volkswagen buses were like the thing from the 70s. We would load all of us in there, and they'd take us off there. And Mom and Dad were very smart. They never let us go in. They would just send my oldest brother in there with a whole order, and he would have to come back with it, right? I didn't even know until I was much older that they had things like Big Macs and Quarter Pounders and all of that too, because we only saw the hamburgers. So they were very, very smart in the way they budgeted. When Mom would come home on grocery day, we really created like a fireman's line, right? From the van all the way to the house, and we would pass all the bags all the way in. Sometimes Mom would have to take 2 vanfuls of groceries. That's how many groceries you would need to take care of 11 kids. But it also meant that we didn't have a lot of new stuff. As the 5th boy, or the 6th boy, think of how many hand-me-downs I had. And just to give you an example, I remember this one particularly beautiful purple shirt. It was kind of a light lilac color, the whole body of it, with dark purple cuffs and collar, and the collar went out to about here, which paired up with bell-bottom pants looked really good back in the early 70s. However, I got it long after the early 70s. So I was always a really stylish little kid. Because mostly it was hand-me-downs from my older brothers. And that never really mattered, right? Most of the time growing up, we had everything we really needed, and I didn't know enough about clothes or any of that stuff to know that I wasn't really as fashionable as all the other little kids. It probably wasn't until I got about in the 6th grade. So around the 6th grade, suddenly my friends decided I wasn't cool enough. And I remember it started with they didn't like what brand of pants I was wearing, right? And so suddenly I was the outcast from all of these people who had been my friends all along. It was also around that time where my oldest brother went off to college, right? So now the second oldest brother took over. And my second oldest brother was the tough one, right? He did not let you go. So he'd pick on something on you and just keep going on it. And so having all of this stuff at the same time, right? Having my friends kind of turn against me, having this brother kind of taking charge in the family when we were around, I started to get really introverted, really quiet. It didn't help that on top of this, right around that time, it turned out that I was pretty good at music and theater stuff. So, nothing says 7th grade boy like music and theater, right? So it got to be a lot tougher, right, dealing with all these things. And it wasn't like I was playing something really cool. I was playing the French horn, right? So that's not known as probably the most macho thing you could be doing at the time. So I really kind of went into myself. I didn't talk much, and to the point where I would get myself so worked up going out in social situations that I started to get dizzy and I'd just fall over. Right? So I remember my parents taking me, now imagine again, on very limited income, my parents were taking me to every specialist they could find to figure out why I'm having all of these dizzy spells and do I have some kind of brain tumor causing it, all of these kind of things. They had no idea what was causing it. Turns out it was social anxiety, but no one knew what social anxiety was at that time. I was just that weird kid that passed out every once in a while because he got himself so worked up, right? So imagine this, right? Here's this kid wearing funny clothes, playing the French horn, and just flopping over every once in a while. So you can start to see why I really liked to go out in public, right? And why public speaking might not have been the thing that I was really looking forward to. Around 7th grade, I taught myself to play guitar, right? I spent a lot of time alone, so here I was. I just kind of started figuring out how to play guitar and started playing. And right after I learned to play, I was invited by my neighbors to go and play at the church with them. So I started playing at the church on a regular basis. And again, not the way to really make yourself look really cool to everybody around you, right? When they would all see you at church and think, okay, now he's over there. Right? And I was even so worried about the fact that I was playing there that I refused to sing. I would just look down and play guitar and look at the ground through the whole thing. So again, going through all of that was not really cool. And again, started getting leads in plays again. Was still 8th grade, I think I had the lead in Scrooge, so I got to be Scrooge in the 8th grade play. Again, still not the way you make a lot of friends. And so through high school, got to do a lot of this stuff, right? Mostly I ran cross country because I could do that by myself, right? I didn't have to depend on lots of other people around me. I could just run and work on my time and not have to worry about other people. And it wasn't until about 11th grade, and 11th grade was kind of a turning point for me because now I became the oldest kid home finally. It was my first time being the oldest kid home. It's also when I got my driver's license. And the high school selected me to go to Boys State. Some of you know what Boys State and Girls State are, right? It's a mock government thing you get sent away for. And it was kind of funny because they said, we've selected you to go to this. We really wanted this other guy, but he was busy, so we picked you. So, but I decided to run with it. All right, here was my chance, right? And that same year, I decided for the first time I got brave enough, I auditioned for a play that had nothing to do with school, with people I didn't know, no one I knew. So I auditioned for this play, and I ended up getting a part. And ironically, the play was Francis. It was a musical story about the life of St. Francis. And I got the part of Leo, right? So, and in the play, Leo was kind of the comic sidekick, right? So I got to be the goofy sidekick guy in the whole thing. And Leo isn't really the most funny character in St. Francis's life. You know, he was kind of serious about things. But in the play, it was fun, right? I got the comedy role and really started having fun with actually doing a comedy role. And it was just one more time where Francis had come back into my life. But even though things had started to change for me, I knew I wasn't really ready to go to college yet, right? I didn't know what I would want to major in, what I would want to do for the rest of my life, and had no idea how I would fare in a weird place with a whole bunch of people I didn't know. So instead of going to that weird place with a whole bunch of people I didn't know, I signed up for and was accepted into an exchange program and got sent away to Mexico for a year with a whole bunch of people I didn't know that now couldn't even speak the same language as me. So I went off and I was assigned a family to live with, so I went, it was probably July after my senior year, I went off to Mexico to live in Mexico for a year and met this family and stayed with them. I was only there for about a month before I started getting really sick. And I knew something wasn't quite right, but I didn't really know how to talk about it or how to tell anybody that something was wrong. And about this time, the phone system in my part of the city where I lived went down and they couldn't get it repaired. So it was down for a few weeks. In that time, I probably lost about 20 pounds. So I was back down under 100 pounds. I was probably about 80, 85 pounds. Yeah, as an 18-year-old, that's not an attractive look necessarily, right? I had gotten so sick, one day it was over 100 degrees, and I could not stop shivering, right? I could not stop shivering. I was wrapped in blankets, I was wearing all the clothes I had, could not stop shivering. My family finally realized something was wrong, right? I couldn't call home, I couldn't talk to mom and dad and say, hey, this is going on, so I was doing the best to try to communicate in Spanish. And so the family said, okay, they realized I was sick, they were going to take care of it. So they brought in a woman from down the street who she's their medical person. So she came in and she brought with her an egg, right? And she started rubbing the egg all over me. So she had to rub it on my forehead and on my arms, right? And down my chest. And then finally she said something and she broke it into a glass. And then she went away. And I didn't know, am I supposed to drink the egg? So I finally asked one of the brothers in the family I was staying with, and he was trying not to laugh as he's telling me this whole thing, right? And she said, no, she prayed over you so that all the evil spirits that are making you sick will go into the egg and you will feel better. Right? So ironically, the next day I felt great, right? No problem. Wow, that egg is a great thing. A week later, I was in the hospital because I had continued to lose weight. Turns out I had typhoid fever, and I had gotten some kind of amoebic infection in. Typhoid fever opens up ulcers all through your stomach and your intestines and things. And because of that, then I got this amoebic infection that went to my liver. So I had all of these big bubbles of infection on my liver. When I went to the hospital, I just finally got on a bus and went to the hospital. And I got lucky. I got a doctor who was actually from the United States, so he spoke English. We could talk about things, and told me, again, that probably another week and I would have died from this. And I had a choice. I could have emergency surgery right there, or I could try this experimental drug that they would have to give me a shot into my liver. So it's this needle that goes up under your rib cage and into your liver every day for a month. I figured if the shot didn't work, maybe I could still get home. But if the surgery went bad, I was really out of luck. So I opted for the shot. So every day for a month, I had to go get a shot up into my liver. It was not a fun process, but recovered, right? So I'm here. But it was one of those times where I really started to see that I could do things for myself, right? That I could take care of myself, and I started to overcome some of that fear of everything else. When you go through something like that, nothing else seems so bad anymore. So I started to feel a little bit better about that. And when I got better, I actually got myself involved at the school that I was going to, and signed up for a religious retreat. So they had these religious retreats through the school. And it was about a 4-day program, and I went with several of my classmates, so there were probably about 50 of us on this retreat. And over those 4 days, just got really close with that group of people. It was a great way to finally start to feel like I fit in now that I was feeling better, now that I knew a little bit more Spanish and could understand what they were saying. So it was a great way. And again, went back to some of that religious-based rock that I had as a kid. And again, ironically, it was run by a Franciscan friar, who was the person who ran the program, and were involved in our school. So it was another time that, again, Franciscanism came up for me. I finally got back and was ready to go to college, and I had decided for myself that college, I was going to make it different, right? I wasn't going to be like I was in high school and growing up, that I was going to be able to rewrite who I was and what I did. And I had a lot more confidence having lived through the Mexico experience and met all of these people, and having been on my own for a year in another country, going to college couldn't be so bad, right? And where other people were worried about having to share a room with a roommate for the first time, or a bathroom with other people, I grew up sharing with 3 brothers and sharing a bathroom with 10 brothers and sisters. So this didn't seem bad at all, right? In fact, it seemed kind of private going to college. But I got really involved right away. I became an RA. I was an orientation leader. By my junior year, I was put in charge of orientation. I got involved in lots of stuff. And really, I think one of the key moments for me was I was pretty involved in things, but I always, right, I still had a lot of that mistrust for people. I was not an extrovert. I still did not like public speaking. In fact, I was a communication major, and public speaking was probably the hardest class you could make me take, right? I remember starting that class and I'd be standing there like this each time trying to give my speech. And slowly got better at those things, especially with orientation and the RA job and those sort of things. But it was going into my college career where I got approached by this one really cool guy, right? There's always that one really cool guy at school. And this guy, his name was Jim also. So Jim was this good-looking guy, well-built guy, who happened to be the captain of the lacrosse team. And he came and asked me if I would be interested in playing. All right, now I told him I have never played lacrosse before, don't know anything about it. It really looked like just a bunch of guys hitting each other with sticks to me. Right? But he said, no, we'll teach you, but we really need a goalie. And I didn't know any better, so all right, off I went. And they taught me how to play goalie, and finally, after all this time, right, getting in the way in sports really paid off. Right? And it turned out I found something I was good at, right? I actually liked playing goalie. And we won a championship that year. My very first year of playing, we won our conference championship. And it was kind of fun to go through that process of learning a sport from having never played to winning a championship and playing in the championship game. So lacrosse became another one of those pieces for me that I finally found a place where I fit in. But also at college, I got very involved in the Newman Center. And the Newman Center, for those of you who don't know, is a Catholic church associated with a lot of the schools, especially a lot of the state schools will have a Newman Center. So I got involved there, started playing guitar at the Newman Center, mainly because I couldn't say no to the priest. He asked me, hey, would you do this? And I said, all right. Okay. And when I started, it wasn't so bad because there were probably only like 10 or 15 people who went. The Mass was 10 o'clock on Sunday night. So that it wasn't really packing them in. But I started playing, and there were a couple other people who would come and sing and play. And pretty soon we started forming a band, right? So now we had a drum, and we had a couple guitars, and we had some flutes, and we had a bass. And now people started coming because the music was pretty good. So it went from only 10 or 15 people to standing room only, well over 100 people, at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night. And it was kind of cool, right? So my family at home would think it was really weird that I was involved in all of this stuff, right, and doing all of those things because it just wasn't who they had seen growing up. But also while I was at school, they all got very involved in the church, and some of you might be old enough to remember mission, when mission became a big thing in the Catholic Church. And mission was an 8-night process, that you went 8 nights, and each night was a different theme. And while I was away at college, most of my family went through this mission thing, and they were all telling me about mission, and you have to, and I thought, okay, my dad has never been so gung-ho about church, but now they were suddenly all involved in church and doing this stuff. So when I went home one summer for break, I got involved in the mission and did the 8-night process along with it. And it was one of the first times where I ever felt it was just unconditional acceptance, where everybody there just really accepted who you were. They weren't judging. And here were a whole bunch of people who were mostly far older than me, right? It was all the people who had been active in the church. And they were so nice to me that it was like having a second family. I couldn't believe it, right? It just was that really good feeling of dealing with all these people who really just cared about you. So it kind of really helped to reinforce that home at church for me. I graduated from Fredonia and went on to ECU. So when I got to ECU, my first 2 anchors, what do you think they were? The first 2 things I got involved in there? Lacrosse, right? Got on the lacrosse team right away. And the Newman Center there. And the priest was kind of this funny guy. Every Mass he would get out his whiteboard and he would draw the same diagram over and over these 2 triangles. And I used, oh, please don't do the triangles again, I'd ask him. And he said, but it works so well. And before I knew it, he had me listed on all of the brochures and everything as the assistant campus minister. Now, I wasn't really sure what that meant, other than I still played guitar and I helped with the Newman Club and those kind of things. He even sent me off to a national conference for campus ministers. I think at the time I was one of only 5 or 6 people at the conference who was not a priest or a sister. So it was kind of an odd situation to be in. But there I was as this graduate student going to the campus ministry convention. So finally I had found ways to fit in, and I didn't feel quite as unusual as I had. But it was never like a 180-degree shift for me. I always had that feeling of just being a little bit kind of behind everybody else, or not quite fitting in, or not trusting people around me. And I had a really bad tendency. The memories that I have most of growing up were all the bad things, right? Whenever I messed up. So, and I'll give you an example. I can remember being a little kid, and I think this was a pre-kindergarten moment, that my grandmother, for Christmas, had gotten us all presents. And again, my grandmother was a farmer, so she did not have a lot of money, but she had gotten all of the kids presents. So I watched all of my older brothers open up their present, and they all got gloves, right? So everybody got their winter gloves. And I opened mine, and I was so excited I was going to have gloves like my brothers, right? And I had bright red mittens. And I remember throwing a temper tantrum because I wanted gloves like the older boys had, right? And even still, I remember that, right? And get this really bad feeling in my gut of, I can't believe I did that to my grandmother, right? And those were the things that I always remembered. Those were the memories that I seemed to carry, right? The other stuff, the good stuff I would forget pretty quickly, but that stuff seemed to always stick with me. So it was still that process of going through trying to get over a lot of that social anxiety. And I was working at East Carolina when I got a phone call from the person who had run a graduate program at UB who said, I know of a job that you're going to apply for. And I said, no, I'm really warm, fat, and happy in North Carolina. I like it down. He said, no, you will apply for this because I told sister you would. So I ended up applying for this job at Hilbert, not expecting to get it, not really, and again, being very happy where I was and what I was doing. I did a phone interview, and on the day I did the phone interview, I was running the Leadership Awards at East Carolina, our first ever Leadership Awards ceremony. We had about 300 people expected for that event. I had all these students in and out of my office getting everything ready, and I'm doing the phone interview on the phone as I'm trying to direct them all. And the committee kept asking me like 3-part questions. And because I was trying to do 3 or 4 things at once, I would remember the first question, the second one I think I would kind of get, and I had no clue what the 3rd part was. So I got off the phone thinking, okay, there's no way I'm ever getting that job. But they called me a few days later and said, we'd like to bring you to campus. And we know your family is in the area, so we will fly you up on a Friday. You can spend the weekend with your family, and we'll interview on a Monday. And I said, okay, that sounds like a good deal. At least I get a free trip home to see my family, right? So I get here. I interviewed all day, and I kind of liked it. It was a place where I felt comfortable, and it was really the first non-state school that I had been at. And I thought, here's a place where I could really kind of get involved in the faith piece, too. But I really, I wasn't really sold on it. And then at the end of the day, I had to meet the college president, right? And the college president and I had a very good conversation, but she was very honest. She said, listen, I never offer a job to anyone, right, in the interview. I like to pray about it, and I know God will tell me the right person for the job. And I thought, fine, I'll go home, right, and I won't hear from them again, and I like North Carolina a lot. And a few days later, I got a phone call from Sister Edmonette, who said, I'd like to offer you the job. And now I thought, all right, they told me then you can't say no to Sister Edmonette, that nobody can say no to Sister Edmonette. And she had told me she was going to pray about it, so I couldn't really say, no, God was wrong. So I ended up moving back here to become the vice president for student life. And it was kind of, again, that irony that it was this Franciscan thing, right? And I was back in the Franciscan piece, and they sent me off to Assisi to do the Franciscan pilgrimage. And that was really the first time I ever really started to pay attention and learn about who St. Francis was and what he did. So it started to mean a lot more for me, and I started seeing all of those little things from the past that started adding up to getting here. And in my first year of working at Hilbert, I noticed that I had attracted kind of these very scary guys who wanted to hang out, right? And chief among them was Nick. Now Nick was probably about my height, but about twice as wide as me. He had a shaved head, and he was covered in tattoos, like everywhere tattoos, like on his neck and arms. Nick had those things in his ears, right, that make the holes bigger that you can keep expanding. So he had 3 big spikes in his lower lip, right? So Nick is not the kind of guy you wanted to run into in a dark alley. And probably about his opposite from me, right? Nick was loud, and Nick loved, I don't know, death metal, I think maybe it's called. We called it Nick's devil music, right? I couldn't tell you one lyric that they really said in it, but they really sounded angry as they said it. So you couldn't get much more opposite me than Nick. But Nick and his group of followers kind of attached themselves, and they were the people who decided they wanted to start a lacrosse club at Hilbert. So we started the Dirty Dogs Lacrosse Club at Hilbert. They also started the Adventure Club, right? So here's this bunch of just very odd guys and kind of scary who started the Adventure Club, and they actually won Club of the Year in their very first year because they were doing so many things that hadn't been done on the campus before and giving people all those new opportunities. Public speaking is still always an issue, right? It's always a struggle for me. So I think I just relate better to when people tell me that they have things going on. I feel like that's part of what I do, right? It's just how I grew up, so I understand it well. I think we all have this image somehow that there are perfect people out there and we're just not one of them. And wouldn't it be nice to be one of those perfect people? And so I think I relate to the imperfections more than anything else. And for me, that's kind of, right? I like that about people, that everybody is different and everybody has those things that makes them special. Elijah's a little more special than most. Eric, did you have something?
Yeah, what's your favorite childhood memory?
Oh, that's a good one. And, I think just how you grow up, when you grow up as one of 11, right, everything is an operation. So we didn't get to go on big family vacations, but we would, every once in a while, Mom and Dad would pack us up, and we'd all get to go to Grandma's house, right? So just seeing how that worked of getting all of those people moving and going in one direction. Probably my most fun growing up was several summers Mom would ship me off, and I'd get to go stay with her parents, who were the farmers. And they had a big farm, and they had horses. So I would spend a lot of the summer with my one aunt who lived nearby. And we would take care of the horses and ride the horses. And it was a really kind of neat setup. There was a barn, and then a big hill, right? The whole pasture was this big hill, and over the back of the hill, too. So it was all fenced in. And I used to love riding that horse as fast as I could over the hill and down to the barn, right? So that was, for me, that was just a really cool thing of growing up and being able to do all of that. And I think when you grow up on a farm, and I didn't get to grow up on a farm, but I spent a lot of time on one, the work that goes into that, when you see what goes into haying and taking care of all the animals and clearing all the fields and stuff, I think that was a big part of the work ethic that I learned too. So I think even though it was a lot of hard work, it has meant a lot to me through my whole life on being able to work hard and not complain about things. CJ.
During your life's journey, what would you say was the most important job that you had as it pertains to your leadership ability now?
I started out as an RA, right, and I learned a lot about dealing with people, but it was probably when I was a hall director, right? Now I had to lead my RA staff. I had to deal with all of the people who lived in my building. I came into a very interesting situation. I got put in an upper-class co-ed building as my very first building as a hall director. It had an RA staff that everybody on campus thought was notoriously bad, right? That was not a very good RA staff. And there were a lot of people in the building who everybody said were troublemakers and you just need to kick them out right away, right? And make a statement by kicking them out. And I think I did all the opposite of what they told me. My RAs, I started off and I just had very clear expectations for them, right? So I literally typed up about 3 pages of what I expected from them, and I went over them word by word, right, with them. And just tell them. At the end of that year, my RAs won all the awards, right? They had awards for the RAs. Mine won all of them. And when I asked the one guy who happened to be a Navy veteran who was one of my RAs. He said, last year I heard all of this stuff about you, but for me, you won the top RA award. What was the difference? He said, people live up or down to expectations. The year before, they didn't give me any. You had a whole list. I knew what was expected of me, and I did it. My building also was pretty successful. We won a lot of the competitions all year because instead of just kicking people out, I got the people who everybody told me were the troublemakers. They ran for president and vice president of the residence hall and won. And so I got them involved in everything, right? They had to help plan everything. And because everybody kind of liked them and followed them doing all the goofy stuff, they followed them into this too. So these people who had in the past just been troublemakers and kind of the ringleaders of everything, now we're ringleaders in a good way, right? And they got everybody else involved. So I think it was some of those lessons about how to best deal with people in that first job that was pretty important to me.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Most of the students here don't realize what the change has gone through since you first came. It was much different than what it is now. What was your most fun memory when you first came? When going back and looking at the old student life situation, what was your most fun memory?
I think it was some of the stuff that we did as a staff. You know, if you look at some of what we did as a staff in those early years, the fact that we were out building snow sculptures as a staff. And won, yes, and won the competition. So, and just so you know, when I got here, St. Joseph Hall had 50 people living in it. Everybody basically had their own room, right? So nobody had to share a room. They all had their own. And we didn't have the apartments or Trinity. So those were the only people on campus. So it's changed a lot. And I think seeing those changes over the years of adding people and what that's done for campus life. And again, having a boss who supported you in helping to bring about those changes, I think was great. But I think some of what we were able to do with the staff to start creating that bond and being able to work together to create those changes was really the most fun part of it. Anything else? Elijah.
I got a hard question for you.
Okay.
What's your favorite type of jelly bean?
My favorite? The grape ones, usually. Well, Starburst jelly beans are the best jelly beans, of course. But the grape ones are the best.
The crazy.
And on that note, one more round of applause for Jim Sturm.